right, welcome to Pragmatic Ops Weekly, episode 19. This is Hiring with Keyaan Williams. Now, Keyaan is an experienced management and strategy programs for regulated enterprises around the globe. He's also helped build security programs for governments, universities, and even down to small businesses. After working as a security leader at the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, he helped write the certified CISO body of knowledge used by the EC Council to prepare thousands of CISO body of knowledge used by the EC Council to prepare thousands of CISOs to obtain this prestigious credential. In addition, Keyaan has supported the global security community as a director on the ISSA International Board of Directors. He is currently the CEO of a professional services firm that focuses on cybersecurity strategy, risk, and workforce development. And that last category is what we're going to be focusing on today as we talk a little bit about hiring. So, Keyaan, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Well, I want to get right into it. You had the opportunity to come up to speak to us at the Chattanooga ISSA chapter. And you talked a little bit, maybe more on the career development, kind of professional development, which is something I know that you're passionate about. We're going to maybe reverse the polarity a little bit on you here, and kind of talk about some of the hiring philosophy. So tell us a little bit about what your experience is with hiring and what type of positions you've hired for in the past.
Yeah, so hiring is pretty interesting. In addition to all of the things that you read in my bio, I'm also a university professor. So my preference, if I have the opportunity, is to find people who are at the beginning of their careers so that there's an opportunity to mold them. When you think about preferences, it's often preferable to have an opportunity to instill in people the vision and the values that you want them to have because sometimes perspectives and backgrounds are incompatible. I really like working with seasoned professionals, but if I had to choose between one or the other, it's really an awesome experience. Graduate, and usually in my case, graduates are graduating with their second degree, so they have a master's in something. They have experience in the workforce, but they are still malleable and open to input and ideas. They are not as hard and grizzled as I sometimes can be, and it produces a really good working experience.
So that's so it's interesting. With the academic side of this, a number of people in my family are in the university and teach in different areas. Is there something that stands out about? I guess your experience with an academic environment and just maybe in larger organizations. Like, how do you prepare them? How do you talk to to prepare them what to expect? How do you contrast that and versus just some of that you just have to get in there and do.
Well, one of the things I think that the security industry should really consider investing in is internships. So many of my best hires, many of the best people that I've worked with out of school, had good internships while they were in school, so that on one hand, they learned things from an academic perspective. What does the book say about how to do X? But then on the other hand, they have the opportunity to put that book learning into practice and actually apply it so that it's not just the theory on the art. The people who have that experience are usually very valuable employees. They are usually very motivated to have an opportunity to apply everything that they've learned in a real situation, and it almost always turns out to be a really good result.
So in my personal background, so master's certificate that I went through with the SANS organization. But one of the things I've noticed is a trend, and even in the job descriptions that I'm posting and working with in my day job, we've started to drop the listing for a degree. It's not as like front and center as like don't talk to us unless you have a specific bachelor's or master's or whatever. I'm curious, have you seen trends like that? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, if we compare certification to an academic
Thoughts on that?
well, if we compare certification to an academic degree, I think the trend is interesting. So historically, if you go back 20 years, a degree was always required. But 20 years ago, there were no degrees in cybersecurity. So what you tend to find is seasoned professionals who have been doing is interesting degrees that don't actually reflect the work that they're doing, really because those degrees didn't exist. And then slowly over time, there was a shift where there are numerous universities because of the program that the CIA has, where they have accredited schools. The schools have defined programs. The schools have defined programs. Those programs are focusing on cybersecurity from a technical perspective, and the degree holders are very high quality individuals. And even with that trend, and even with all of the value that comes from that kind of program, what you have had in the last 10 to 15 year program, what you have had in the last 10 to 15 years is a growth in certifications, and technical certifications are very real time. You know, one of the challenges with education is that in higher learning, you very often have books that are dated by the time they're published and don't always reflect what is actually happening in the fields, and especially and specifically related to cybersecurity. It becomes a challenge where the degree actually can, in some cases, have less value depending on the coursework and depending on the textbooks than the value that you would get by doing a certification, because many of your certifications are accredited. ANSI goes through a rigorous process to make sure that the job task analysis associated with the certification is valid and accurate. To maintain the ANSI certification, the credential holder has to do continuing education, and all of the things that go into certification are now becoming comparable to a university degree, which may explain why some positions are looking for a certification instead of making the degree a requirement. I think on balance, everything works together. It really depends on the type of person that you're looking for, the type of background that you're looking for, and the skills that the person brings to the table are all going to be contributing factors that influence whether or not you hire the person that we're talking about.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I want to kind of build on top of that and talk about, being in the cybersecurity industry, you'll hear fairly often that there's a shortage, there's a gap of qualified professionals. How does that relate to what we were just discussing in terms of the industry is moving so fast that we're kind of outpacing the course material and the certification material. And if you do agree with that there is a shortage, and agree with that there is a shortage in the infosec industry, how can good hiring practices help fill that gap?
Well, so I agree with the caveat, and so we'll talk about that real quick, and then I can share some perspective about the hiring practices. Some really smart people, and I haven't been engaged in the conversation, but I have been following it on LinkedIn. After RSA, are all in a state of ruffled feathers because of the claimed shortage of cybersecurity skills. And one of the things that people don't talk about is the specific area where that shortage exists. You know, there are many, many people who are experienced security professionals and they can't get into areas of security. If I'm an expert in governance, risk management, and compliance, for example, it might be impossible for me to find a job because that's not what people are looking for. And I think the shortage is specific and unique to offensive and defensive technical skills. So if you have a red team background and you can do the offensive and break into things, or if you have a blue team background and you are very good at setting up defenses, at setting up monitoring, and providing the technical response when there is an incident, that's where the shortages exist, because many organizations don't have those people on staff. Or on the other hand, if it is more business centric, if it's more leadership, and organizational leadership, then those people exist because there are plenty of people that come from a variety of backgrounds. So, I would say that with a bit of caution, we should continue to promote that there is a skills shortage. I think there's a shortage of specific skills, but there are really, within the domain of cybersecurity, 50 to 100 specific jobs you can do. Are we talking about there is a shortage in digital forensic investigators? Are we talking about there's a shortage in security analysts? As we get more and more specific, it's going to help then kind of go into the second part of the question. How do you hire and find the right people? And part of that is going to depend on whether you're looking for a technical person or a business person. if I'm looking for a technical person, for jobs that I have been on the end where I'm applying for the job, some of the most difficult jobs to get have been ones where they don't just accept your certification and don't just accept your certification and don't just accept your academic credentials, but they actually give you a test. Imagine if I'm applying to be a digital forensic investigator and they actually set up a scenario and I have to go in and demonstrate that I can do forensic investigation using the tools that the organization has. That is a much at what my resume says and trust that I know what I'm doing, because some people tend to embellish or some people may have skills that are out of practice and don't apply to the current situation that the organization is looking for.
So I like I like that you brought that up with you give a test or I like that you brought that up with you give a test or a scenario, and it's something that I've been involved with. At different points, I is going through an interview and here go solve these problems, answer these questions, and I've had teams that go through and set that up. Where do you see that kind of if you're trying to hire a lot, or if you're kind of under pressure to hire fast, that can be hard to do. Like, how do you see that those kind of skills tests? Do you think is that something that should be a part of the standard technical area should be looking at, or is it something that maybe is more specific to certain skills and roles where you're looking for people?
Well, if I were a king for a day, I would argue that everybody who is applying for a technical position should be given a technical skills test to validate that they really can do. Should be given a technical skills test to validate that they really can do what they said they can do. People often talk about in cybersecurity that the user is the weakest link. But from my perspective, the weakest link in your security program is misconfiguration. So if you are depending on the technical skills of your security staff to configure all of your security controls properly, then it is imperative that you validate that people know how to configure the tools, that they know what they're doing, that they do it properly, because their errors or their mistakes can be much more detrimental than a malicious link and a phishing email, when we should have phishing controls in place within the organization, and those technical controls overcome the curiosity or the human nature that is in our non-technical and non-security staff who work within an organization. Now, one thing that I didn't address, and I think is kind of worth adding quickly, the alternative that I've seen work much better is to, in advance, identify staffing firms that can bring qualified individuals on board when you need them. Account temps is a good general example because they had a series of commercials that were really funny and were really valuable. But there are security staffing firms. I know of one in Twin Cities that does a great job developing the talent. And when you need somebody, people in that area know who to call to say, hey, I need some firewall engineers for a short project, or I need something to get me over the hump so that I can go through the full recruiting process. And while I'm going through the technical testing and everything that's involved in hiring, I still have a firm that I can count on to provide qualified individuals to cover that gap in the interim. I think that's a much better solution than kind of rushing out there and hiring somebody because you have having a solution in place to fill that need.
That seems like really good advice. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've used a technical sourcing firm, but that might be something that I definitely maybe had more prominence in my hiring war chest. Let me pivot here just a little bit, Keyaun, and talk about one of the things that I heard. You have a test of your own, so to speak, that you do not for technical, but for communication capabilities. And I would love for you to maybe expound on that and talk about why it's effective, something you brought up in your presentation.
Well, yeah. So at the sidebar conversation, which is what I think was a great reason for me to come to do this podcast. But the conversation was focusing on, if you think about all of these social factors that are happening in hiring now, where, people feel that there's discrimination, people feel that, there's a good old boy system or some type of buddy system. My alternative to that is really to do a double blind approach where people have to write an essay. I don't know your background. I don't know your name, your ethnicity, your gender, anything about you. The initial evaluation is based on how do you answer the questions that I'm asking. From a communications perspective, answer the questions that I'm asking. From a communications perspective, if I have people that are doing writing, if they're writing reports, if they're communicating with partners and clients, then my first impression, based on how well you respond to those questions, is going to be very important because a significant part of your work is going to be writing. The second part of that is that once you kind of narrow the pool down and you start to have the interviews. I have not done this book yet. It's something that I'm thinking about, but it would be interesting to take the spy voice that you see in the Hollywood movies, where you can't tell the gender or the age or anything about the person, to have a interview with somebody and they sound like they're holding one of my children for ransom. It would also help to remove biases from the conversation, so that you can focus on the words that the person is saying and focus on the way that they're communicating. And my belief is that ultimately, by having the double blind test, so to speak, is it really helps you identify who is the best person available to satisfy the need that I have and is willing to accept the salary that I'm willing and available to offer for that position. Now all of the biases are removed and it really allows you to boil everything.
Yeah, that's I think the spy. I'm sure there's a name for it, but that's got to be that's pretty clever. I've heard of some of these big software firms. Well, there was a one story where they expected a candidate to walk around campus in a kind of sport jacket and shorts as a way to exercise their humility. You might also exercise their humility as well as mask any bias or differentiation points there. So definitely seems like an interesting play there. Just let me follow up on the communication bit you talked about. You mentioned you have a focus. Your practice has a focus on risk management. You mentioned you have a focus. Your practice has a focus on risk management, consulting, and really talking strategy. What are some of the things you look for? I've heard it said that writing is a dying art, and I think you made some quip about the AT for at versus the at symbol. What do you look for in terms of evaluation?
I really like very good academic writing. For the students that I work with and for the employees that work with me and work for me, there is a very high standard for writing. I don't expect everybody to have a degree in English, but there are tools that will help you. I have Grammarly installed that will help you. I have Grammarly installed on Word. I have it installed on Outlook. I have it installed on my web browser, so that in the event that I'm in a hurry, I have a tool to check and make sure that I'm not making a mistake or sounding like an idiot. Because as a professional services firm, that could be detrimental to my business. I'm not to ever have to trigger the errors and omissions part of my professional liability insurance. Writing is extremely important in terms of just plain communication. And in many situations, especially from the perspective that I have where I'm providing a service to a customer, my customer is not always somebody who has a secure communicate difficult technical industry specific terms in regular business language. I think is very important. And where you talk about writing as a dying art, I think that formal business communication is really become a dying art, where most of your CEOs and most of your business executives are above 40, many of them are above 50, and the people who are coming behind them that are going to succeed them and take over in the future have a completely different style of communication because they've grown up trying to constrain all of their communication into the amount of space that Twitter allows.
And I've been thinking more about that as kind of the way that to communicate internally, as you say. I think it's at Amazon, right? At Bezos, if you want, he doesn't like PowerPoint, right? He wants a structured document, and you document, and you make your case there, and it's in words. And other places have done that as well, where they say, here is today's what we're going to read. Expect everyone to read it for the first 15 minutes, and then we're going to dive in and discuss. Not every place, a lot of companies and firms, their culture is not one that is used to that. And I think, like PowerPoint with zippy animations and things is more the norm. Do you what are your like what are your like how do you see that getting in there? Do you think that's worth, at different levels, trying to bring it in? And some examples that I think of that come to mind is when we start a new project, like something in Jira, thinking about having a more verbose language in there, and getting that into the system, as opposed to maybe trying to do that in longer form emails. Do you have any, like, how do you see that kind of fitting in, and maybe some way to make that more part of the culture?
Well, I think it depends on on the scenario of the situation. Like, there are a lot of people that do PowerPoint incorrectly. The I was on the slide, and each line is no longer than 5 words, and that is the ideal. It doesn't always happen, but it communicates the idea that you want to use the slide to communicate an idea. You don't want the slide to tell the entire story. So in communication, there is an art to verbal communication where there have been presentations that I've done. I did a keynote presentation once, and I had 75 minutes to talk to the audience, and over 75 minutes, I had 2 slides, and one of those slides was the title slide. And so, depending on the audience and depending on what you're communicating, that is going to influence the approach that you take. One thing that I like to use is mind maps, because then you can draw an idea that is the theme in the center and start to branch out from that. And drawing the mind map in front of the team as you get them to understand the ideas and how all the ideas are connected is an effective communication tool, but not everybody learns how to do that. Is are connected is an effective communication tool, but not everybody learns how to do that. I think where you think about Mr. Bezos and Amazon and his preferences, it reminds me of one of the teams that I led years ago at another company, where I had a deputy CISO who was with me, and he just hated public speaking. It didn't matter whether he had the comfort of a PowerPoint presentation to keep him on track, or whether he was just getting up and giving a 15-minute presentation to the board. Public speaking drove him crazy. It was not one of his skill sets. And I encouraged him to join in the organization, because we had some really smart people at the organization. Our organization had its own Toastmasters club, and through the power of Toastmasters, through that small group setting, and the regular encouragement, he is one of the best public speakers that I can think of. And if I ever need somebody to speak at a conference, or if I ever need somebody to talk about areas, it is going to be awesome that he's going to communicate the message effectively. And knowing where he started and knowing where he is today, I think any organization that has to do a lot of speaking, formal communication, any kind of lecture or anything else, it takes very little effort to start something like Toastmasters. Toastmasters isn't the only solution, but it's easy to get started. Toastmasters isn't the only solution, but it's easy to get started. They have a lot of curriculum. It's a tried and true method. And between the formal speeches that you would give, and between the table topics where they just give you something and you have to talk without stuttering, without spitting, without stumbling over yourself for 3 to 5 security professional, that's extremely valuable, because you never know who's going to come to your desk, and you never know what they're going to ask you when they get there. So it helps to have practice doing that in a controlled setting, so that when you experience it live and in person at work, it's not unnerving, and you can deliver the right message in the right message in the right way, so that people take away the content that they're supposed to walk away with.
That's I really like that. A sidebar. My children's school, they actually start public speaking in kindergarten, and when it's kind of part of the drama department. But they as they go through K through 12, they're used to public speaking, and I think and I think back, it's like I wish I would have had that, because I think that's fantastic. Um, to pivot here, so we've talked about a skills test, we've talked about communication ability skills test, we've talked about communication abilities. What's next on your list? What else do you look for in a candidate, as you're trying to feel out?
Problem solving is very valuable for me because of the nature of what I do. And risk management consulting, when you're dealing with compliance or when you're dealing with strategy, the sky is the limit, so to speak, in terms of the situations that you'll encounter. So, part of my hiring criteria, we've talked about the testing, but one of the tests specifically is how do you solve problems? When I was early in my career, once and just level one response activities, the way that they selected their candidates was based on their ability to just think critically and logically about a situation, even when the situation had no right answer. It was the problem solving process that helped them identify who were the right candidates because of all of the variables and because of all the chaos that exists in this profession. And I was so impressed with that. And in reflection, I decided that that's something that is going to be a part of my own processes because it really does help you identify good people who think well, so that even if somebody doesn't have all the technical skills, or even if they don't have the academic pedigree, a really good problem solver is just as valuable as a very good academic thinker or somebody who has passed a certification exam.
Okay, well, let me as we consider kind of problem solving, we talked about skill set and the ability, whether through certification or some type of training, to hone those skill sets. We talked about communication and the ability, the different opportunities to hone an individual's communication capabilities, whether it be writing or public speaking. So maybe moving on to problem solving, to get better at problem solving, or is that just a natural talent? It's you got it or you don't.
Well, I think it's a talent that can be developed. There are numerous logical reasoning tests. My brother and some of the younger people that I know that are at the beginning of their careers actually experience those with some companies, for family members and for some of my students. I give them some coaching, and whenever one of them says, "Hey, I'm going to be given a logic test, how do I prepare?" There are numerous logical reasoning tests that you can find on the internet. Wikipedia has interesting things to say about it. There are actually that have those tools that will help people develop that skill, because logic is something that is developed over time. The way that you connect the dots, the way that you look at things from a different perspective. I don't think that is a natural or an inherited skill. I really think it's a learned skill, and people can develop that with a little bit of practice and with the right tools.
I think that's really good advice. The flip side of that, quickly, for us as hiring managers or hiring managers who are listening to this podcast, do you have any recommendations on how you can look at that in candidates? I mean, you mentioned a few different testing. Is there any interview questions that you find particularly helpful when trying to problem solving capabilities?
Well, you think of the annoying questions that were on the SAT exam. You have two trains leaving different stations, heading towards each other on the same track, and one train is going 55 miles an hour and one train is going 90 miles an hour. Where are they going to intersect? The person might not 90 miles an hour. Where are they going to intersect? The person might not have a clue about what the answer is, but to observe how they start going through the process of figuring out, how much do you remember about distance equals rate times time? What other tools can you bring to bear really quickly to solve the problem? Just type of answer for a question that is non-technical and has nothing to do with security, but is still something that is going to cause them to have to roll their eyes in their head and look off into space and start thinking. It's the thinking that I'm really observing. How are you thinking? How are you processing it? It is a ridiculous question. Is that question stressing you out and causing you to it? It is a ridiculous question. Is that question stressing you out and causing you to shut down? Or is it bringing out all of the creativity in you? And picking wild, random scenarios, from my perspective, I think is a really good tool to test people's character, to test their attitude, to test their perspective, and just how do they solve.
Great. The other area that comes up to me when I'm thinking about hiring somebody, and I put quite a bit of weight on their attitude. Are they humble? Are they willing to learn? How are they going to? I think you touched on a bit here. How they got what comes out of that, especially if they're in a team environment. Where do you come down on attitude? Where do you weight that in the candidates? If you're saying they're maybe really humble, really fantastic to work with, but maybe their technical skills aren't quite there, their communication, and how do you assess that?
Well,
Skills aren't quite there, their communication, and how do you assess that?
well, so what I will say is that if somebody has a bad attitude, even if they check all the boxes and all of the other categories, I'm probably not going to hire them. In the presentation that I gave to the Chattanooga ISSA chapter, there's actually a whole section focused on attitude and talked about that attitude is a choice. It determines your approach to life. It determines your relationship with people. And the conversation went on, but just to be concise and focus on those first three areas, every person has the option to choose whether or not they're going to have a good or bad attitude, and the choice that they make is going to influence how do they interact with other people. It's going to influence, are they going to be somebody that I want to work with? Are they going to be somebody that I want to be down in the trenches with? If somebody has a bad attitude and the client is difficult, am I going to lose $1 million contract because you can't wipe a frown off? In a professional services environment, attitude is extremely important. But just from the perspective of professionalism, if you're dealing with any kind of professional, most professionals are providing a service to somebody at some point. Your executive assistant is providing a service to the executive that he or she is supporting, the male person, the attitude that surrounds them. It's really like a cloud. And the question is, do you want that cloud to smell like methane or do you want it to smell like perfume? And if it's smelling like methane, everybody is going to avoid that person. It's going to stay away from them. If it smells like perfume, then it is pleasant. It gives off a good aroma. You're happy to be around them, and it causes other good things to happen because the attitude is positive and good.
I think that analogy is going to stick. I like that. Hopefully, with folks, uh, I want to wrap up here, Keyaans, and just tell you this has really been beneficial for myself and John. I'm sure our listeners. In the spirit of maybe pragmaticism in terms about, okay, let's talk about these hardcore takeaways people can walk away with. For those who might be listening, who are, let's say, new managers are looking to pick something up and have been doing it for a while, any parting advice, any things that they can start doing tomorrow to improve their hiring practice?
So the first thing that I will say is be open. What tends to happen in a lot of cases is that however HR gets the details and the attributes for the person that they're looking for, they very often don't reflect the person that you actually want. I've had really good success bringing technical writers onto the team to do security work. No background, no experience as a technical person, but communicated extremely well and was willing to learn. I think your character is going to take you much farther than your skills because your character is your character. You can learn technical skills if you're willing to learn. And I think for hiring managers, having a willingness to be open and planning effectively so that you have the time to find the right candidate, I think are the most important things. Earlier, I think is an important takeaway. Find a firm that you can partner with that can do staff augmentation and allow you to ramp up gracefully if the need arises so that you can take your time and picking the right candidate. What I've seen time and time again is that when you have some discernment, when you take your time with it, those people usually stick around with you for a long time. I've seen it with my own company. I've seen it with some of my colleagues. You're going to be much better off in the long term if you take the 2 to 3 to 4 months that it takes to find the right person. You have multiple interviews with that person. Take them out to dinner and see if they chew with their mouth open so that you know whether or not this is something they're going to do when they're in front of clients. But learn as much as you can about the people that you're considering bringing on board because they're going to be a reflection of you and your organization. And while you spend the time doing that, allow some of the great staffing firms that are out in the marketplace to provide.
Well, Keyaaan, I'm going to have to tell you that last bit about chewing with your mouth open. I'm going to take that back and make my kids listen to it. And they're going to no doubt call daddy out on it when he does it, sitting across the dinner table. So there'll be no shortage of strife in my household. But I think we're all going to be improved for that because I've used that strife in my household. But I think we're all going to be improved for that because I've used that similar line. But it's funny how things still they're timeless in terms of their applicability, right? So we really appreciate you coming on. This has been a lot of fun. This has definitely been, I think it's helpful for me. I'm sure John's the same, and we look forward to getting this showing up on Pragmatic Ops Weekly. We appreciate all of our listeners taking time to spend some their evening or their morning with us talking about hiring. We're looking forward to getting a few more episodes out on this topic. And that until next time, take care.
Thank you.